Hey, so let's make a chapel. First of all, you have to download the template from the link in the description. I made this template. It's pay what you want, so if you want to donate you can, but you don't have to. For this project I'm using 5mm foam board. I like foam board because it's sort of like a stronger cardboard, it's just a little bit harder to cut. I'm using a cheap glue stick here because the intention is to be able to rip off the paper afterwards, and this works about 20% of the time. When you're cutting foam core, I recommend cutting in multiple passes and really taking your time. Even though my jump cuts are quite fast, in reality this process was pretty slow, but that was okay. I just chilled out and I took my time. I think overall this took about 45 minutes to cut everything out. More detailed pieces like the window details would probably benefit using a scalpel or a hobby knife, but this is what I have and it worked okay. I'm using PVA glue to assemble all the pieces, and I use PVA glue because it's cheap, but it also dries a bit flexible, so it's going to stand up to a lot of use and storage. I'm using thinner pieces of cardboard for the door details just to give it a bit more dimension. I'm hoping the end result will be something like iron panels. I want this piece really dynamic. I want models to be able to jump in and out of the windows, so I've done everything 28mm scale, and I made sure that all my models can fit through the windows. Cutting out all the other sides is very self-explanatory, just use the same principles as the front. The trickier bit is the shingles. I designed the shingles to be easy to cut out and also easy to lay together. For the shingles I'm using some cardboard, but I'm using some thick stuff. I actually made it myself by layering two thinner sheets of cardboard together and gluing them together with PVA glue. The shingles alternate in pattern, so be sure to keep an eye out that you're assembling them in the right order. They also don't have to be perfect when you cut them out. It's going to add a lot of character if some of them are rough or some of them are odd shapes, and everything's going to tie in really nicely at the end when it's all painted. Later on I'm going to cover the shingles in PVA glue. This will make them a bit more durable, but also make a nicer surface for the paint to sit on. The glue and paint is going to shrink when it completely dries, and this is going to curl up the cardboard and make the edges of the shingles look a bit more realistic. I'm assembling these with super glue because flexibility isn't very important and it's a lot faster than having to wait for each layer to dry. The shingles have a top strip of cardboard, which is meant to be completely hidden. When you're laying down your first shingle, make sure to line up that top strip with the bottom of the roof. And then you just repeat the process for the other side. Then we're going to make a cap for the roof, and this is going to join the two pieces together. Fold the roof detail on the dotted lines. Then we cut out the roof supports. Now that all the main components are cut out and sort of assembled, now it's time to put it all together. I'm using toothpicks for structural support, and you don't have to do this, but it makes assembly a lot easier. Essentially I'm just putting toothpicks in and then stabbing it into the sides where I want it to be glued, and that sort of creates a key so I can match up everything later. And I'm using my mat as a reference to try to make everything as right angular as possible. After I'm happy with all the angles, I then use super glue to tack in the corners just to hold everything together while the PVA glue dries. After that's dried, I put on the roof cap and test fit the roof. I made the shingles a little bit oversized, but that's just because I don't want to be cutting them out all day and it's time consuming enough. But you can very easily follow the same system if you want to make your own or design something different. And then add the roof supports. I add them one at a time and test fit the roof and make sure everything's still lined up. Be careful with super glue and exposed foam. Sometimes it may cause the foam to melt. If that's the case, just use PVA glue. I know the house isn't going to be perfectly square, so I'm making the base after. I put the house on the base and then just measure around it, and I'm giving it about 5mm of clearance. Sometimes foam board can warp in the heat, so before I use it for projects I like to put it under something heavy for a while just to make sure it's perfectly flat. I then cover the whole thing in PVA glue and start covering it in sand. This is going to give it a nice stony texture, and I'm also going to add some interior details as well. PVA glue has a tendency to warp flat surfaces, and this is due to shrinkage when it dries. I try to apply glue on both sides at the same time to avoid this. When the sand's eventually dry, I get some watered down PVA glue and I cover the whole thing in it just to seal in all the sand. Then everything gets primed in black paint, all ready for painting. When it comes to painting, I just like to use whatever I have lying around. So I'm using a sandstone colour to dry brush on with a big brush, and I'm also going to mix in some sort of radioactive green as well, just to make it look like moss. For the roof I use the same colour, but then I mix in blue and it gives it a bit of a weird turquoisey colour, sort of like corroded brass. Feel free to throw in some dark browns or washes, just experiment. Paint is very forgiving and it's easy to fix your mistakes if you don't like them. For the doors I started with red and brass, but I wasn't happy with the brass, so I decided to add a little bit more detail and go with a more corroded look. To add some detail, I wanted to try out making rivets, and for this I'm using some glitter and some super glue, and I'm just setting it in place with a knife. Grabbing the glitter is a bit tricky, so I use a knife blade and dab the end of it with a tiny little bit of super glue. I went a little bit overboard with super glue, so to fix that I just used a cotton swab and dabbed it back. To make door handles I got some wire and wrapped it around the back of a paintbrush. This made a sort of a spring shape, and from there I just cut out little rings. You can also buy metal rings inexpensively from craft shops or online if you don't want to make them. I then glued these rings onto the door and added a little bit of cardboard for some extra detail. I wasn't really happy with how it turned out, so I got black and covered all the brass and then dry brushed a little bit of green over the top, which tied everything together. I then added a little bit of that green all over the rest of the building. If I added a little bit too much, I just blended it in with my finger. And that's about it. If you want to take this further, you could add some boarded up windows, add some nice interior decorations, make the doors movable so you could open them. You could even destroy half the building and make it look apocalyptic. The possibilities are endless. Hi, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, let me know. Send me emails and comments and all that. Thank you for everyone that used the template and donated. Saw lots of cool stuff, things that people made. Someone even 3D printed it, which is pretty cool. So yeah, if you want more, don't know when that will be. So hopefully soon. I guess subscribe and then you'll know. Yeah, alright. See you when I see you.